Hey, this is your sister Blondie, and we are talking about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. The topic: maturity involves empathy and courage. Now, what is maturity? Maturity means you have a sense of self sufficient to allow you to be both courageous and considerate. Maturity is principle centered. Think about that for a moment. It's principle centered, such as integrity, honesty, trustworthiness. That is principle centered. It's the characteristics within yourself. It's principle centered. Now, there's a lot of people that are not necessarily principle centered. They could be spouse centered. They could be friend centered. They could be centered around their children. But none of that is people. A lot of people are looking to other people to feel a sense of self. And a lot of people are looking to the outside world and other people or even material things to get fulfillment. Fulfillment comes from within, and it's being principle centered. Now, think about if you are centered around your children, which, hello, I've been guilty of, okay? Or I know I'm throwing myself under the bus here. If you're child centered, if your world revolves around your children, what happens when your children grow up and you you go through that whole empty nest syndrome? You're lost. Now you really have to figure out who you are. You really have to figure out who you are. And empty nest syndrome wouldn't be as hard of a hit if you already had a sense of self. So it's very important that you're principle centered and not people centered, not spouse centered. Because when people are spouse centered, that's known as codependency. You're not supposed to center your life around your spouse. You're not supposed to center it around your children. Or there's other people who center their life around work. No, you are principle centered. That way, when something doesn't go the way you expect, your world doesn't fall apart. Your world doesn't fall apart because you're not codependent. Whether you're codependent on a spouse or a child or work, you are principle centered. Along with this goes with circle of concern versus circle of influence. Who do you have the most influence over? That's yourself. You have the most influence over yourself. Circle of concern, you may or may not have influence over. And then he breaks it down a little bit into what you have direct control over, what you have indirect control over, and what you have no control over. You have control over yourself. You always, always have control over yourself. You have, you have, well, what did I just say? Oh my goodness. So you have direct control, indirect control. That was the word I was looking for. So you have direct control over yourself, and then you have indirect control over other people. I mean, the other people, you could influence them, but you don't have control over them. And of course, there are things in life you just have no control over. Okay, there's always going to be something in life that you just got to take it as it comes. You don't have control over that. We all have things in our life where we don't have control over that right now. So that's where being principle centered comes in. When you're principle centered, You can handle the things that you don't have control over.